Offhand, I'd say no. This is not a microphone?
Okay, this is February 5th, 1986. This is Joe Todd and Berniece Jackson, and interview with Dr. David Jacobson in Woodward, Oklahoma. Dr. Jacobson, where were you born?
I was born in a place called Norma, New Jersey. Norma, Norma, New Jersey. It's in southern New Jersey in Salem County.
And when's your birthday?
October 27th, 1910.
10. Who was your father?
My father was George Jacobson,
And your mother?
and my mother was Minna Jacobson.
What was her,
M-I-N-N-A.
what was her maiden name?
Well, that was a similar, they weren't related, but they had similar surnames.
And were your parents from New Jersey?
No, my parents were born in Germany.
In Germany.
Yeah.
When did they come to this country?
In 1906, 4 years before my birth.
Did they talk about the trip over?
Oh yeah, you always heard mother talk. She traveled on a ship that was known as the Kaiser Königin Victoria, which means Queen Victoria. And they traveled in pretty good style. They were far from penniless refugees. They lost all their money after they came here. It worked in reverse.
Any incidents happened on the boat trip that she related to you?
No, she never did mention. She did mention, though. See, she came over with her sister and her sister's husband, and between them they had, I think, 11 or 12 children. My folks had 6, and Tante Carolina, means Aunt Caroline, she also had 6, I believe. But otherwise, they remembered stopping, disembarking at Castle Garden, they called it then. I think it was probably Ellis Island. Castle Garden. There was a rather deluxe ship, and it was in a deluxe area. She didn't come in with the more impoverished steerage passengers. They traveled pretty first class.
What part of Germany were they from?
Yeah, my mother was reared in Hamburg, and my father was lived in Memel. That's East Prussia. That's it no longer belongs to Germany. I think Lithuania calls it Klaipėda or something like that. But that's my mother reared. And after their marriage, they lived also in East Prussia called Königsberg, the city of kings.
Why did they come to this country?
Oh, just for more opportunities. It's just like me leaving New York to come here. You know, we all wanted to get into the Wild West Indian country. And he heard from his relatives and his brother-in-law in particular. I thought this would be a pretty good place to come to.
And they settled in New York?
No. My father wanted always to be a farmer. He's no more a farmer than I can be, but he wanted to till the land. He learned that farming isn't everything it's supposed to be. So I was born on a farm there in New Jersey.
And tell me about the farm. What chores do you do on that farm?
Well, no, I was too young. We left when I was about 4 years old, and they have a recollection. I think I have too. That I found myself underneath a horse. I remember seeing big legs like tree trunks all around me. I wasn't particularly worried. My mother was screaming. And there's one other incident too. They came early in June, I think, and then the weather was getting hot, and all of a sudden they heard shooting. So my mother says, "The Indiana coming. The Indians are coming." So my father had bought a $3 muzzle-loading Civil War rifle, and he put everybody in the cellar, and he sat by the window there, waiting for the enemy, and he saw something move, and he fired. We found a dead dog later. It turned out to be the 4th of July. But my mother, she said she sat in the middle of the basement with her children around her, determined to die like a lady. That's right, the Indiana. The Indian coming.
And that was on the farm in New Jersey?
Yeah, it was a farm in New Jersey, yeah.
What year was that?
And that could have been about 1914 maybe. I don't remember the incident because then I was about, it might have been around 1914. I may remember a little bit about it.
Yeah. From the farm, where did the family go?
Then the family went to Atlantic City, New Jersey, where my father sort of, and then to Philadelphia, where my father went into business with his sister-in-law's husband, and it didn't turn out that well. So slowly we went from riches to rags. nice.
What kind of business did he go into?
Well, as I remember, it was more fabrics and textiles. And he wasn't any more of a businessman than me. He liked to get into the soil and everything else. So eventually we drifted. I remember when I lived in Atlantic City, it was 1915, I saw my first airplane. I still remember that just as vividly.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. It was a little seaplane, and it landed, and then we admired it. The next day we came back, it was burned into ashes. Had a little tough luck with this little seaplane. But I remember I saw my first aircraft in about 1915. And then 1916 we went on to New York, and my father went in with a textile firm, which he always thought he knew more than the boss. But we grew up in a part of New York called Brownsville, which is now unfortunately a ghetto. And that's where I started going to school. I remember when I was rather small, and the principal doubted that I was old enough. They didn't bring, they call it a Geburtschein, birth certificate. So my mother asked me in German. She says, "Tell the man when you were born." So I told him in German. Ich bin Oktober 27, 1910 geboren. So then he took me in, and that's where I started. I remember everything vividly from then on out, from about 1917 or 16. And 1917 was a particularly cruel winter. I remember horses slipping and falling all the time, and soldiers too. My brother Sam then went into the army, and I was walking along with him. He was kind of a little guy, about 5'1" maybe, 112 pounds. And as I was walking with him, a couple of people turned. I could hear him say in Yiddish, "Achenvei," that means heavens to Betsy. Is that what we got to fight with? Achenvei. Achenvei is what you say when a wing falls off an airplane, you know. Achenvei. I remember I looked at my brother Sam, and I remember distinctly. And there's another recollection I have too. I remember seeing the Lusitania was sunk. I was just 5 years old, but I could read it. The letters looked 2 feet high. Lusitania sunk. I remember that distinctly. Lusitania sunk.
Was there any discrimination against your parents because of the war they coming from Germany?
No, not particularly. See, when you had a member in the armed services, they had what they call a service flag. It's a nice red, white, and blue flag with a blue star in it. If they got a gold star in it, that means they were killed. So I don't ever remember any. We always spoke German anyway. It didn't seem we had any problems. I know in school, in particular. And then, of course, like every kid, I figured, 2-3 weeks of school's enough. I already knew everything. Why go to school? So I'll never forget, I says to Mutter, "I'm not going to school today." She says, "Oh, yes, you are." So she grabbed me by the ear. And I mean, she reminded me of a battleship. She was pretty well. She grabbed me by the ear. I said, "Okay, Mutter, I'll go. I'll go to school." No. She took me right into the first grade classroom and sat me down. She says, "Here he is now." So from then on, I went to school. But after 2-3 weeks of school, that would be enough for anybody. I didn't see. Yeah, those are recollections. And then, of course, on holidays and such, or weekends in summer, we used to go to the beach at Coney Island. We'd go on the subway trains, and that got to be a big part. And finally, I was very happy when we finally moved to Coney Island, which is where I grew up.
Tell me about Coney Island in those days.
Yeah, it was marvelous, the ocean, and I'd stand on the beach watching the ships putting out to sea. I'd cry like a baby. I wanted to go on so bad, on these ships. See these great, at that time they had a lot of ocean liners. I saw them all the big ones. And then, as a result, one of my sons became a ship's engineer and another one went in the Navy, while his old man stayed in Oklahoma.
Were you there when they had the big fire at Coney Island?
At that Luna Park. Let's see, I think it happened afterwards at Coney Island. At Luna Park, it burned when I was, I think I was up in Connecticut then. Those were wonderful amusement parks at Luna Park. And then I saw them building the boardwalk. And they built that by sinking 50-foot pilings into the sand by means of a hydraulic jet. They put it alongside of this big piling, the thing would just go right down. It was marvelous the way they built that thing.
That was at Atlantic City?
No, New York.
New York.
Yeah, and I still remember the Atlantic City boardwalk's quite a little big. Atlantic City's, in fact, it's got quite a more imposing boardwalk. But this was the one in Coney Island. And that was, I used to walk, we lived on, first on 33rd Street. I had to walk to 17th Street to go to school. And walking back in the winter time, the wind coming out of the ocean was just killing. I remember walking backwards from 17th Street to 35th Street. Then we moved to 22nd Street. That's where we bought a house. And when I went up, they had us go up on the roof. Recess, they didn't have any yard there for us. And I could look and see the feather beds my mother would put out the window. She brought feather beds with her from Germany. They're just a monstrous pillow. They're the best thing in the world to sleep on. You get submerged in a feather bed.
Did you speak English when you started school?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay. But you still spoke German at the home?
Yeah, mostly. I rarely spoke anything but German with my mother. It didn't seem natural to speak. Even though to speak English to her, even though she was a teacher of English in Hamburg, but it was much more natural to talk German with her. And
That was the language you had when a child growing up.
yeah. So,
And it was natural for her.
yeah, it was natural for me. I always spoke to Mutter, and I still remember always saying, "Warum hast du das getan?" Why did you do that? As if you can turn the clock back and correct it. And I always tell people, my name is David, and a Hund is a dog. So I told everybody I was 15 years old before I found that David du Hund was 3 words. She'd say, "David du Hund, come here." "David, you dog," yeah. So I was 15 years old before I found out that David du Hund was 3 words. And then I had a typical Jewish upbringing, going to synagogue and Hebrew school. And
Which school, Hebrew school, did you go to?
well, Hebrew school was. We also went to a regular school, and afterwards we went to a Hebrew school. It was a 35th Talmud Torah. They call it Talmud Torah, where you learn the Torah, where you learn the sacred books. But after I had my bar mitzvah, my confirmation, then I didn't pay attention to it anymore. You're supposed to be a man, you're supposed to observe everything, but I was never too good an observer. And of course, we had very strict dietary laws. You couldn't eat any pork, and you couldn't eat any clams, oysters, something like that. So one time I was about 14 years old, I decided to eat a non-kosher hamburger. Not non-kosher hot dog, that was half beef and half pork. And I didn't get hit by lightning or nothing, so I didn't figure the Creator minded very much. I had a little hunk of freedom. So I was never very, very orthodox religiously at all.
Okay, now the school that you were going to is strictly Orthodox?
Well, yeah, that's the Hebrew school. Of course, I went to regular grade school too, you understand, yeah.
Right.
But that he tried to be, and however, he was a little different. We studied grammar quite a little, and my love was always languages. And they used to call grammar in Hebrew is called dikduk, and I was the best guy at dikduk. I was a crackerjack. But then the rabbi didn't like me because I used to like to take slingshots out and shoot them. And most of my friends were people around the neighbors. Next door were Italians, and then around the corner was the Finns. And I learned to speak their language pretty good. Suomalaiset, you're the Finns, And I got to know the Finns, and then I used to go fishing and skating with Willie Laksonen, who's dead now. Boy, it was wonderful. In my early pre-teens, we'd go fishing. At that time, the bay was full of fish. We used to bring out tons and tons of fish. Really, we'd catch 3 or 4. The fish was called a Lafayette. It's a little perch about 5-6 inches long. And the Finns used to dry them on the line. In September, you just see lines and lines of fish drying on there.
Now, what part of New York City did you live in at that time?
I lived in Coney Island there.
Coney Island.
Yeah, I can always get you a map if you're interested.
That's
Are you
okay.
familiar with the geography?
Yeah.
I lived in Coney Island. Then eventually I went to high school and graduated high school. I graduated in grade school in 1923. And then I got out of high school in 1927.
What high school did you graduate
It
from?
was called James Madison. First I started in New Utrecht High School, then they just built this high school brand new. And I was in the first graduating class out of James Madison High School. And of course, they weren't close. We had to take a subway train. They gave us what they call car tickets. They gave us fares to go up.
And where was the location of the Hebrew school?
The Hebrew school was about, we lived on 22nd. It was on 33rd Street, so we'd walk about 10, 11 blocks. And we'd get down in the basement. And you always had to have a hat, and half the time I'd lose my hat. So sometimes I'd knot a handkerchief and stick it in my hand. Oh, well.
And after high school, what'd you do?
After high school, I had a series of jobs, one of which let's see, the first one amounted to anything. I worked in a financial district in New York. And then I went to Brooklyn College in the evening, and then sometimes I'd get laid off there, or they'd retrench a little bit. I'd work for my brother, who was a sign painter. And I got to be not a good sign painter, but I got to be a pretty good sign hanger. And then I was an usher in a theater.
Was this before the Depression?
This was just about, yeah. This was, the Depression hit when I was about 21 years old. And that's when I got laid off finally from Wall Street altogether, I think.
Were you on Wall Street when the market crashed?
Yeah, I sure was. I was on the stock exchange floor. I'll never forget that.
Tell me about that.
Well, everything started collapsing. They mentioned this fellow jumped out of a window, this fellow jumped out of a window. And I was at 100 Broadway, and next to us is a monstrous building called the Equitable Building. It's a block square and 40 stories high. And I heard a tremendous thud while I was walking around the front. It seemed like a woman had jumped off a roof, and she hit a grating after falling 40 stories. Hulda Browoski was her name. I'll never forget her name. And 15 years later, I could still see stains on that building. Boy, it was a mess. You know, I'll tell you, they don't look too good after landing that far. And I remember another time I came to work, and there was a pickup truck, and there was a dead man in it, and a man lying on top of it where he caved it in. You could see his arms and legs. I've seen quite a few gruesome sights, like drownings at the beach.
Why did the market crash?
Well, the old story, people at that time, you were allowed to buy stocks on very small margins. You put on 5%. Well, the market drops 5%, your money's gone, see? And like anybody, it's like they thought in Woodward, everything would keep going up forever, you know? So some people would buy on a margin of 5 or 10%, and I mean, for 10%, they could hold 10 times as many shares of stock. But I couldn't see it. I was never that smart, so to go broke. And I remember some real tragedies. There was one time in other words, when your stock starts falling, then they want more margin. They need more money, you know, the broker to protect himself. So I went to one place, it was a factory, and the owner made very fancy little gloves, lace and leather and everything else. And I came there, and he looked pretty bad. He handed a package to me. At that time, I was a messenger. And then I walked out. I read the next morning where he shot himself. Just they mortgaged everything. You'd be surprised. My father, too. My father lost everything he had. He tried to get me to the stock market, too. But it's very tempting. You know, you got just a few dollars. Well, let's say you got $1,000. Well, you can control $100,000 worth of stock. But when that $10,000 is gone, you're gone. And also, the worst thing was that at that time, say, if you bought stock on margin, naturally, you had to borrow the stock, see? So the brokers would take your borrowed stock, and then they'd sell it short. Are you familiar with short selling?
No.
Where you sell with the prospect of stock going down, see? Say you buy stock for $100 theoretically. Well, then you sell it at that high $100. You haven't got the stock, see? You borrow the stock, and then you buy it back at $40, see? That's what's called selling short. And at that time, the brokers would use your stock to protect themselves when they sold short. In other words, when you sell this, you sell a stock that you haven't got that's selling short, see? So the market's about 100, fine. So then you can pick up this before 100 stock at $40, see? So they'd sell stock for 100 that they didn't have, and then they'd buy it back. They hoped they'd buy it back at 40. And I never had the comprehension. I didn't particularly give a hoot about it. I wanted to go sailing, swimming.
So what exactly were you doing when the market crashed?
I was I worked in the stock exchange floor carrying buy and sell messages, and either phoning them in or giving them to somebody else to phone in. You just go to each one, and he says, hey, he'd yell, hey, Dave, come on. So I'd phone the orders in, or have somebody else phone the orders in, sweep up once in a while.
And then what was your reaction when you saw what was happening?
Well, we just worked like the devil there. You know, there was 16 million shares, which is nothing nowadays, you know. Not 160 million shares. So I didn't particularly, I had my job to do and I did it. So all the paperwork, I think we worked 24 hours a day for the next week trying to get everything straightened up. It caused a tremendous depression, you know. This was 1929, and the effect wasn't full till 32.
What was the date of the crash?
October 29th, I think, 1929. Yeah. But that, you know, all of a sudden, there's a stock called Goldman Sachs. It went from 120 to 3 in one day.
What did you do after the market crashed?
After the market crashed, then I quit. Then I started working for my brother again, and I started going to night school.
Where?
And it was called Brooklyn College. It was in a series of buildings, of office buildings. They just rented space. Now it's a real big campus. And I did pretty well in math. I always got good grades, and like in college algebra, the next day after the exam, I'd forget everything. But then I always did like biology, and then of course, by the uttermost freak, I went into veterinary medicine. One day we were studying college algebra. It was a very hot May day, and Dr. Whitaker, our teacher, said, "Look," he says, "I make $2.30 an hour, which is colossal. You know, it's like $23 or 23." And he says, "What should we do?" So one guy says, "Let's talk about what we're going to be, or what we want to do." See, so they mentioned various professions like that, and finally, one fellow says, "I want to be a veterinarian." Everybody hooted and jeered. Ho ho ho! He wants to be a horse doctor. Ho ho ho! Horse doctor. They laughed and jeered. So, but I didn't laugh. I didn't jeer. I went over. I said, "Say, what's this veterinarian business?" He says, "I got an uncle who makes $2,300 a year as a government meat inspector." Holy smokes, $2,300 a year. I don't think even Rockefeller saw that much. Wow-wee, $2,300 a year. I said, "How you do?" Well, he told me about Cornell University, and I applied, and I think they were just a wee bit prejudiced against city folks, which means anti-Semitic. So I couldn't get in. So then I went to Connecticut to work for my brother pumping gas and helping him fix cars. And a fellow by the name of Abe Frank, may his name be hallowed eternally, he'd come in and he wanted I was pumping gas. He says, "Dave, you want to make $5? Well, boy, $5, that's more than 50 nowadays. And yeah, he said, "I got to clean out a chicken house." So I went back, asked my brother if it's okay. "Well, sure." So we went and started cleaning up the chicken house, and his son came out. Gene Franks, yeah. He said, "How you doing?" I said, "I ain't doing very good. Those unspeakables at Cornell turned me down." He says, "Why don't you try applying to Kansas State?" I says, "Kansas State College?" I said, "Where is it?" He says, "Manhattan, Kansas." I said, "Oh, go on, ain't no such a place as Manhattan, Kansas." "Who you kidding, Manhattan, Kansas?" He came out with a pencil and a postcard. He says, "Now you just go write a letter of application the best you can." So I just wrote this thing, and nothing, anything come. I wrote to the dean, and I got the nicest letter back from Dr. Dykstra. He's another one who's in my pantheon of heroes. Bless him. I hope I'll see him sometime. And he wrote me a letter, and I'd mentioned, of course, that I'm unfamiliar with the profession and that I have no funds. He wrote back, he says, "It's very rare that a qualified student ever fails because of lack of money." So I had, I think I had $37 or something like that. So I grabbed the train, went to Kansas City, and went to Manhattan. And then, no, I couldn't get to Kansas. The train wouldn't, I didn't take the train. I took the bus. It was cheap. I think the bus was $17. A colossal sum, you know. So off I went. My family got together. I think I ended up with about $80 or something like that. So I got to Manhattan, Kansas, and on the bus I met a very nice fellow from Missouri. We just going there for the first time, and we just hit it off wonderfully well. So I got there, and at that time President Roosevelt had made a program called the National Youth Administration, where you could work. They paid a quarter of an hour, and you worked yourself up from there. But a quarter an hour wasn't bad. That's 5 hamburgers. You know, working for 5 hamburgers an hour ain't bad money. You know. So I got off with this 6'4" fellow from Missouri called Gene Damer from Webb City, Missouri. I'll never forget him. He's gone now, obviously. And we walked around. We found a room for rent. So we went there. We asked. What's the rental here? She says it's $14. I said, "Holy smokes, a day, a week, a month?" Turned out to be a month. That's right. And the accommodations consisted of small rooms where everybody did their studying, and then a great big sleeping porch where they had the bunk double beds. So the 4 people living in that room would also sleep on that same bed. And somehow or other, I got my 25-cent an hour job.
What were you doing with the NYA?
There were just various workaround. For instance, there was a kind of a rough hill which we converted into a parking lot. That was throwing a hump into a hollow, I guarantee you. And what they did was we all we'd break up the soil with a plow, and then we just toss it into the truck. And finally they let me drive the mule with the plow. And I got such an enormous thrill out of it. Boy, oh boy, from Coney Island, driving a mule with a plow. And it was good. So that's one of the jobs we did. And then, showing how fate works, one day I was walking home from a dance. The dance cost a whole dime. You gotta watch yourself in that country. And I saw a fellow who straddled a island in the gas station. He was eye-centered with 4 wheels. And he was rather intoxicated, so I managed to find some 2x4s and managed to jack him up and got out. And he says, hey, you go to school? I says, yeah. He says, I'm Guy Jolly. He says, you got a job? I said, well, I've been, leveling off the parking lot. He says, can you paint? I said, oh yeah, I did a lot of painting at home. So he put me on a paint gang for 35 cents an hour. And everybody envied me. And to eat at that time, I contributed money, but most of those farm boys would bring sausage and all kinds of produce from home, So the first time a fellow brought a ham, I sat down there, and the first time this fellow brought that ham, and I just got my 35-cent an hour job. So as I cut into the ham, I said, look out, you fellas, I'm Jewish and I might get hit by lightning by eating pig. One guy says, well, you didn't get hit by lightning. He says, you got hit with a 35-cent an hour job. So then I got onto the wrestling team, and they really subsidized it. They really should have closed the school for how they were bribing us. I got a job in a restaurant where I could wash dishes for 2 hours for a meal. Or maybe, 2 hours for a meal. I mean, when they spoil you, they spoil you,
What year did you go to Kansas State?
1934 to 1938. Mm-hmm. Class of 38. And the dollar then was as big as a horse blanket. Boy, you got a hold of the dollar, you had something.
Any experience that stand out in your mind about Kansas State?
Yeah, first thing, the whole way of living, they close the school at noon, and the teachers walk in, with no ties on and just shirts. Some had polo shirts on even, and they didn't care how we dressed. Which reminds me, when I was going to college in New York, it was a terribly hot day. It was steamy, like New York can get. The humidity that can reach 110%. And we went into class. We had that was the German class, yeah. And the professor looked at us and he walked out, and I says, what is it, Dr. Mankiewicz? He says, I will not teach a class of unclad barbarians. And all we done was loosen our jackets and took our ties off. So you can see a tremendous contrast, the easygoing Kansas life. I knew I'd never go back to New York to live after that, It was everything was so free, and it really was wide open spaces, and we experienced a couple of horrendous dust storms. Oh boy, the sky looked a pale blue. And I mean, we had everything. Oh, it was a terrible dust storm. There were just 2 of them, however, and my family was fully convinced I'd die of thirst. They didn't think I'd come out of it alive, Mm-hmm. They thought I was going to a desert. My brother, so I sent pictures of and here's Manhattan, the beautiful Blue Valley and the Cobb Valley with plenty of trees and Mount Hills and everything else. The idea of Kansas was the dust like we did in Oklahoma, just a dust heap. Mm-hmm. And I got to love Kansas. Oh, I got to be part of it. And the other boys from New York, they kind of got into a little ghetto of their own, but I went out among the natives, I'll tell you. My roommates was a Missourian, 2 Texans, and a guy from Nebraska. And then the first Christmas vacation, the fellow from Missouri took me home with him. And there I got to milk cows. They were milking, I guess I could milk 8 cows morning and night. It was a nice life. They got up at 4 in the morning and milked. And then you ate breakfast. And that was a meal. And then of course you did all your chores. Yeah, I pitched right in. His family didn't want me. I was a guest, but I just dove right in there. I really got to milk a cow.
What do you feel about Christmas?
Oh, it was a marvelous thing. The whole, you got to remember, I never experienced a Christmas before, being Jewish and everything else. So I just, there was a turkey and I bowed my head in prayer right along with him. It was a wonderful experience there. Yeah. And that was my first year. And then, of course, I had other roommates. I went to other farms. There was one place we went up for Christmas, and it was northern Kansas. It can't be any colder in Siberia. And we ran into a snowdrift. It wasn't snowing too much, about 1.5 miles away. And then we walked, and we finally got there. And then they came out with pork backbones. I told them the same thing. Watch out for lightning. I dove into those pork backbones. Oh, heavens, that was something. Yeah, they were nice people. Their name was Meineke. And the fact when we got married, I spent our honeymoon there. The usual honeymoon for a New Yorker. A coyote hunt.
Where was this?
We went back to the same place in northern Kansas. And I got to know that family very well. They always invited me. And I was too stupid to know that their daughter really, they had the most wonderful daughter. She was a goddess. You call her Valkyrie if you know anything about the Valkyries. She was a real Valkyrie. And I was too dog. Then there I worked for my brother-in-law, building houses and such like. In fact, I was driving some nails and I heard that Lindbergh got killed. Not Lindbergh, Will Rogers.
Will Rogers.
Yeah, Will Rogers, yeah. I was in Connecticut when, there's lots of things. You always remember where you are when something happens. I was in Connecticut when Will Rogers got killed. I remember that. That time it didn't mean very much to me. I never knew I'd be in Oklahoma.
So did you you become a veterinarian after 4 years of college?
Yeah. Then the first thing I went to practice in Pauls Valley, Oklahoma.
Why'd you come to Pauls Valley?
Well, there's an ad. Somebody stuck a card up on the bulletin board in school. So I figured, and I found out I fit in very, very well in these rural areas.
So when did you go to Pauls Valley? What year?
I went to Pauls Valley in 1938, and then I wasn't there more than about 3-4 months, and I got appendicitis. So I figured, well, maybe I better look for security. So I went to work for the government. First as a bank tester, then a meat inspector. And then I caught brucellosis. And I suddenly realized there is no security when you're one heartbeat away from eternity all the time. So I decided to do what I want to do. I spent time in the hospital back east. Oh, should I quit now?
Yeah.
So I was in the hospital, and first in Staten Island, New York, and then they transferred me to my wife's folks in St. Louis. And in St. Louis, I was there on December 7th, the attack on Pearl Harbor. So I asked for discharge, and I went back to Manhattan, and I was a captain in the Veterinary Corps Reserve, and I thought I'd be called up right away. And they called me up about 3-4 months later. I was running a raging fever. I really had brucellosis, good, 105. So they wanted to know if I'd sign a waiver relieving the government of all responsibility in case I got ill. So I told them I'd rather not. So I got an honorable discharge in August of 1942. And then there was a head of the Chamber of Commerce here in Woodward. His name was Corb Sarchet. Have you ever heard that name? S-A-R-C-H-E-T. It was signed by, said they needed a veterinarian in Woodward, Oklahoma. So me and my daddy-in-law got into my Model A, and now we came to Woodward. And it looked so wonderful. We went to Buffalo first, and then we came back. I walked around, I saw Crystal Beach Lake. It just looked like a whole paradise. So I was talking to them, I said, I'll be back. They wouldn't believe me, that I'd be back. So then I came back with Clara, and as soon as we drove over the town, she said, I'm home. So the first place we lived was on 7th Street. Kind of expensive rent. I think it was $12 a month You gotta watch yourself there. I came here, honest to goodness, I came here with $98 and 2 kids. One kid was 4, the other 3 months. $93 and whatever was. And at that time I felt very confident I'd make it go over any place. I felt if I jumped out of an airplane with a forceps and a scalpel in my hand, I'd be making a living before I hit the ground. I felt very confident because nobody had stayed here. Everybody had been here just told me there's no place to go. It was supposed to be a complete, absolute disaster for a veterinarian. And then it wasn't very long for us. People come and got me. They got a little notice saying a veterinarian here, and there it was.
So you had no trouble getting your practice set up?
No. I'd say from the first day. I had some pretty good luck and some not so good. But that was it. I felt at home. And then I was living at 1323 3rd, paying about $20 a month rent. And I found this house was available. I can also remember who lived here. Well, anyway, it was a local man living here who later on went out and had a big restaurant down, what's that restaurant south of town? Oh, whatever it is. Anyway, he was living here, he was paying, I think, $18 a month, and he had a chance to buy the house, they told me, for $1,500. So I went to a lady by the name of Janella Jones, I hope people remember her, and I said, I'd like to buy the house for $1,500. She said, I've got to get $1,800 for it. So, I put a payment down, and the payment on it was $11.11 a month. So it was such a pesky nuisance. So, and when people ask me, how come you stayed in Woodward? I says, anytime you can have a house paid for in 6 months, that's where you stay. And there's a very good Latin expression that says, ubi bene ibi patria, where it's good for me, that's my fatherland. And I was strictly ubi bene ibi patria. And that's why I'm here. And then I got, I used to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you know. It never did bother me. I don't believe I ever looked at the time until my kids started going to school. The phone would ring all day. A fellow would come to the door at 3 in the morning, knock on the door. I'd walk over and say, did I wake you up, Doc? I says, no, I had to go answer the doorbell anyway. So I really had a ball. I loved every minute of my practice. There was nothing in my practice that I disliked. Could have been the raunchiest thing I could be. One time it was about 108 degrees. I was down at the bottom of the canyon taking a putrid calf out of a cow. So south of Quinlan, you know, kind of. The fellow says, how come you ended up out here, Doc? I says, you mean not everybody from 22nd Street near Mermaid Avenue in Brooklyn turns out south of Quinlan? And then also, I was always known as having a non-Jewish mentality because I like to shoot, I like to hunt, you know. And, you know, a Jewish mentality means you got to sit and study or you go into business. So it was very nice. I could do all the shooting I wanted to. I could do whatever I wanted. It was wonderful. When people tell me, tell Mom I got a good Social Security check, to say, well, you earned it. I said, heck no. I had a ball all the time.
What were you doing when the tornado hit?
Well, I'd been south of Woodward. I wish I remembered that place. About 3-4 miles south, and the fella had a milk fever cow, and I'd just gotten her up, and I looked out the back, and I saw a long cloud, and sunlight was shining on each side of it. Though it was rather late, it was getting late in the evening. I could see there was a solid wall of black. It did look a couple of miles wide, and light at each side of it, you know. And it looked like there was dust coming up, like somebody sweeping a dusty floor. And that day, the weather was very unsettled. I noticed 2 or 3 times I was supposed to go out and work some calves, and the weather always changed that much. But this was just about evening, and I guess the tornado just followed me home. I was southwest of town. At that time it was known as the J. Winterfield place. I don't know whether Winterfield means anything or not. J. Winterfield. He had a nice farm on a lake. I always did go on a lake, go fishing there. And the barn got demolished, but the cow survived. Anyway, I was going home, we were eating, and all of a sudden, I hear a noise like a freight train full of junk. going through a rumbling there, and I looked out. There was fires. So my wife got a postcard, and she was going to write to her mother that there may have been a storm, but we are all well. So I decided to take it. She said, "Go take it to the post office." So I'd go out in the morning, and driving to the post office, there was a lot of fires. And I drove past the funeral home, and they were unloading corpses, like there was caught with 6 or 8. So I ran home right away, and I said, "Clara," I said, "I bet there's been 10, 15 people killed." I said, "I'm going over to the hospital." And I went to the hospital. It was just an absolute shambles there. So a lot of people came to my house while I was working in the hospital. And the most peculiar thing is there's complete, utter calm. No hysteria, no nothing. Just as calm as you and me talking here. And I asked one fellow, "How'd you get along?" Well, he said, "I didn't do too bad." He said, "I just lost 2 of my 5 children." It's just unbelievable. And I remember I was in the hospital, and there was a girl there who couldn't watch while I was vaccinating a dog the day before. And she was helping me with the most grisly things. She'd say, "Doctor, this man is kind of gasping. What's the problem?" I said, "Well," I said, "it looks like air hung out. This is going to die." And I don't even remember what happened that night. It seemed to pass in 5 minutes. I was so busy. I got in with a Dr. Lyle, who was a brain surgeon, and we had 10 or 12 patients with skull fractures. And you know, their heads looked just like you take an egg and hit it against the table. So what we did there, we just say if there's an overlapping of these skull fragments, you cut this part off, and then you pry the other up to take pressure off the brain, and then carefully, if you can, pick out the fragments of there. But I hate to say we had 100% record. We had no survivors. And it was terrible. You know, here are young, husky people. One young, healthy woman, you know, husky woman, otherwise. But as far as there's a girl missing, Joan Gay Croft. And I think I may remember somebody took her to Oklahoma City. I don't know where the name stuck, but I don't know if she disappeared. Were you familiar with that thing?
Yeah.
And I think somebody picked her up. At that time, if somebody said, "I got a ride to Oklahoma City," off they went. You know, we didn't care. And then I guess the equivalent of a MASH unit landed later. But like I said, the night went like a snap of a finger.
Were you in this house when it happened?
Yeah, I was in this house when it happened, yeah. And in most Jewish homes, they have a talisman on the door. I've got it now. It's called a mezuzah. It commemorates the time when, to force the Pharaoh to free the children of Israel, he killed every firstborn. So every Jewish home makes a little spot of blood on the doorway. To commemorate that, I got this mezuzah. You know, each Jewish home has a mezuzah. And just for the heck of it, I put a mezuzah on there, you know. I didn't observe my religion or anything. So I always tell everybody, you know, tornado didn't go by. I said, my mezuzah saved 1/3 of Woodward.
How far from here was the tornado?
Yeah, well, you got to Main Street that was hit, and then you got downtown. It kind of made a swath, you know, running to the northeast.
Yeah, so about half a mile from here.
Oh, no, it was less than that. I think 3, 4, 5 blocks or something like that, it seemed like. I know the worst of the devastation was, you know, came up from the southwest. And then there was a lot of damage north of town. I remember I went out the next day looking for casualties, and I saw what looked like a dirty glove sticking out from under the eaves of the house, but it turned out to be a human hand. And we pried it up, and it was a Mr. Rosendale's body we pulled out of there. But it's you just can't believe it. I guess it was a stunned. And then luckily some ham radio man came. They come up with a ham radio, and they just tossed them, just write your message, they tossed them up in the air. And my mother told me that all of a sudden, that early that next morning, a fancy car drove up and a man came with a message from me that we were all well. And I know the operator looked kind of funny to me. I said, just tell her my mother there's been no damage and no injuries. I think he hadn't heard that one until then, you know. But that was good. So then, it was they were worried about contaminated water, so I sent the family to Los Angeles to,, stay with the sister, which hadn't even been necessary. But that tornado. So naturally, instead of locking the barn after the horse was stolen, I built a barn. I got the best storm cellar in town. You want to see a storm cellar? It's a storm cellar. Let me show you one. Here, that's one reason it's a big roomy house, and I built. One day I came home, the kids was making noise, so I just got mad and I built upstairs so I can sleep where it's quiet, so I can sleep during the day. And one time I heard the phone ring and I ran, there'd be no answer. Phone ran. So next morning my daughter Edith says, says, Mommy, Daddy's acting so funny. He jumps out of bed, runs to the telephone, puts it to his ear, puts it back and goes back. I was like a punch-drunk boxer. I was hearing bells.
Give us your children's name.
Yeah, well, my firstborn is Edith, 1938 was her birth, and then there was Ted in 1942, and they were born in Manhattan, Kansas. And then I had Danny born here in the old hospital, and Becky, you can see Becky and Susie are two little babies. Danny's the one with the sailor suit.
Mm-hmm.
So we had our family in sort of two hatchings. There was a 7-year gap between Danny and Susie.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a rabbi here in Woodward?
No. There was one Jewish chaplain during the war.
Mm-hmm.
And once in a while I go to some of the high holiday celebrations at Galvin down in Oklahoma City to the synagogue over there.
Tell me about how you celebrated Hanukkah when you were a child.
Oh, Hanukkah, oh boy, it was a great celebration. Oh, yeah, we sang and we had a wonderful candelabra my brother brought from Germany. The cups, you stuck a wick in and you poured oil. So one day I poured in some of her expensive olive oil. She saw me doing it, she wanted to wallop me, But that olive oil burned unbelievably beautiful.
Just the menorah?
The menorah, yeah. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. So, oh yeah, we'd sing. Haneros halalu, anachnu madlikim. We like the life. I go back to New York every once in a while to speak Jewish.
And what about the Seder meal at Passover?
Yeah, well, Seder. Yeah, I went to one or two in Oklahoma City. I went to 3 or 4 in Amarillo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I went there, but there was nothing like we had. At home was really good. One day my mother, may she rest in peace, she had a Seder on the wrong evening. Oh well, it was still pretty good. Yeah, and there you leave a cup of wine for the angel, because he opened the door and that's the angel come and take him a sip of it.
What about your bar mitzvah?
Well, that was also very, very nice. You sing they call it the Half Torah, and you go and present yourself with the Torah, and then they gave me a Bible inscribed with in gold in Hebrew letters with my name. I wish I knew where it was.
Now the boy has a bar mitzvah. Does the girl have a?
Yeah, the girl. Now it never in art. When I grew up, they never had no such a thing. They call it a bat. See, bar is a son of, and bat is the daughter of. They do have bat mitzvah celebrations. I know a lot of my nephews and nieces, their kids have this bat mitzvah. Mitzvah means the duty. Mitzvah. And when you help some miserable soul, you say, well, it was a mitzvah, it's a duty, something you had to do. A mitzvah is a good word, it's a benevolent duty. But it's service, the son of the covenant, son of the service, bar mitzvah. And my kids never expressed, I kind of regret now that, I told my wife was anxious, but just as willing to become Jewish, so I said, well, wherever we go, we just pick what we want. But in a way, I'm sort of sorry my kids didn't experience the bar mitzvah.
Mm-hmm.
But this isn't really bar mitzvah country.
Mm-hmm.
But they're still there. I think they've lost quite a little heritage I had. But then you can't be in two places at once. So I did a pretty fair country boy job of doing this.
That's true.
I don't think too many veterinarians worked on a stock exchange floor during the crash.
No.
Yeah. And I can go to New York in 10 minutes. I'm just as much at home as Subway and everything else. In fact, I went to work in New York for about 9 years. Somebody told me I got this job. Funny thing, how fate works. I went out. It was a cold February day, and I went out on a couple of calls, and I slid off the road twice. So I said to Clara, "Where is that brochure from the American Veterinarians for Israel, to go to Israel. So I found it in the trash can. I'm good at finding stuff, you know. And then I went to New York and I met this veterinarian, Dr. Kessler, and he was sort of fascinated with what the Brooklyn boy was doing out here. So he said, well, I said, someday when you're tired, why don't you just come on? He said, I'll have a good job for you. He did have a good job for me. And then I was talking to somebody, I said, I think maybe I'm 63 years old, maybe I'll try something else. One fellow said, nah, he said, nobody ever changes their life when they're 63 years old. I said, well, I will. He said, how are you going to do it? I said, I'm going to slam the door, take the key and head out. And I got a wonderful job there with a good salary and an apartment. And then and another thing, I went back there to see my, you know, I had all my siblings over there. It turned out I saw my siblings oftener when I was in Oklahoma than when I was right around the corner, you know. Well, you know, you're a rare bird when you come visit them, you know. Everybody wants you as a guest, but when you're around all the time, you lose your charm. But I worked in New York about, I came up, I usually worked 3 months and spent a month or so here. It was a wonderful vagabond existence, which I'm now doing too. My wife, are you familiar with Mrs. Jacobson? Right?
Yeah, I've met her, yes.
Yeah, well, she had the mastectomy, and she's now in San Francisco getting chemotherapy, and she has to stay there. So, just like Jackie Onassis, I got 2 homes.
Mm-hmm.
She can have 2 homes, I can have 2 homes.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll be going to San Francisco in a couple of weeks. Kind of miss my missus. And I got a new little Filipino let me show you my granddaughter. Okay. There's a lot of interracial marriages there, you know. Yeah, this is my little granddaughter, Leah.
Oh, isn't she sweet?
Yeah, she's half Filipino. And here's my daughter-in-law, Edna, who's the most wonderful person. You know, I had to go back to San Francisco. I was terribly sick here, and she's a registered nurse. She took me back to San Francisco, and I got doctored there. So, when I was...
Is this a grandchild?
Yeah, that's Leah. Same one. Yeah, I miss her a lot. That's why I'm going back. But then I have to come here. You know, I got to maintain things. And
Did you tell us your wife's maiden name?
my wife's name is Clara Walters.
Mm-hmm.
She's a Methodist, and she's always been in the Methodist church, always in the choir. And I went there a lot of times to say, if you can't be a brother to the church, it's okay if you're a brother-in-law. So I never missed any covered dish dinners, you know. They always used to talk about rice Christians, you know. So I was a beans and weenie Christian, and the Methodist church in Manhattan, Kansas, you know, for 15 cents, usually Sunday afternoon, you never got a meal there where we boarded. You know, board was $14 a month, you know, you could barely afford that. Imagine feeding people $14 a month. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so room and board was like it is today, $18 a month for room and board.
Mm-hmm. Were you married in her faith or your faith?
No, we just had a civil ceremony. Yeah. I told her whatever she likes, I'll get married in church with her, but then she'd been writing up and back to my folks. She thought, well, we just had a civil ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
But she always went to church. She was always an active church member, always in the choir, you know. Mm-hmm. And then she'd be here now if it weren't for saying that. But luckily I had children in San Francisco, so when we got an apartment, she gets her chemotherapy there. Mm-hmm. But the doctor says there's no going back. She has to be there. They have to treat her continually as long as the treatment works, is what he told me. Mm-hmm. I've been asking her, I think I don't know whether she's going to go home or not. Everybody said she did recover a lot better in San Francisco, so I don't know if it was getting away from Woodward or getting away from me, but she did recover. So basically, I took root here pretty good for alien plant.
And what occupations did your children take up?
Yeah, the oldest one is a teacher. Married to a college professor in Santa Barbara. Uh-huh. And then my son, Ted, I kind of put a bug in his ear about, I was so longing for the sea. Let me see. Ted, Ted went to the Merchant, I longed for the sea so much that my son Ted went to the Merchant Marine Academy and became a ship's officer. And then he went to other businesses there. He did well sailing, but eventually you have to start to take risks. And then Dan, he was in the Navy, and then they were ready to send to Vietnam as a Navy medic. You know how long a corpsman. They call themselves corpsmen. And they were ready to go out, and then they had what is known as, it just shows you how fate works. They had C-Lab, and he was not an organic chemist, a biochemist. And I guess they pushed the computer button and his name came out, and they had him testing for the various, they call lipids, the fats. They wanted to know if staying submerged for a long time would cause abnormal amounts of fat to accumulate. And then two of those, they call them aquanauts. They wanted to see if they could live indefinitely in the ocean under pressure, and they found out they couldn't. So luckily, he's with us now. And he's a pretty skilled repairman for heavy machinery there in Washington, D.C. And then Susie, she's the third child. She became a computer engineer. I don't know where she got it. It just all proves my wife is a smart woman, because she couldn't have got the brains from me. You know, she used to send postcards. She could write a volume on what. She was meticulous. Yeah. And then of course, then there's Rebecca. She's gonna go to law school. She's been a paralegal and worked in a law office. And like I say, there's Susie is in Berkeley, and the two kids are in San Francisco now.
Well,
It sounds like you have a wonderful family.
Yeah, wonderful family. My life is really something. And another thing, you know, I did a lot of traveling. You know, my wife is just a traveler. If I was to tell her tomorrow morning we're going up to Mount Everest barefoot, she'd say, "What time?" I mean, in 82, I was almost 72 years old. I had open heart surgery, and then in 83 I had a gallbladder taken out. But last spring we went to China. In a 747 SP, one tank of gas non-stop from San Francisco to Shanghai.
Well, didn't your wife do some writing? Or
Yeah, she's a good writer. She's always good
do
writer.
you have her manuscripts in book form?
Well, no, she never did finish her book. The book has
didn't?
never been finished. No, I did. I always wrote the stories of my. Maybe I'll hand some of these things to you. I think I still may have clippings while I travel. I keep things very orderly. Let's see what happens here. What's this? This is one of my first trips. I took overseas to Madrid. And here's a trip we took on a QE2. They printed. I got to get a bunch of clippings someplace.
Now this is your writing.
Yeah, that's mine, yeah.
That's yours. What all foreign countries have you been in?
Well, the first trip I took was down to the Caribbean. I went to there was a meeting of the British Caribbean Association, and I went there to Trinidad, and that was my first trip overseas. That was about 59. Then I went to Spain. They had a veterinary conference. It was all deductible.
Yes.
Veterinary in Madrid, the World Veterinary Conference in Madrid. And then from Madrid I went to Switzerland, and then I had an Austrian working for me. Yeah, you might read, you might like, I don't know if you want to keep, this thing tells you a little bit of my history there in New York, I think. And one thing I'll never forget is all the dead horses used to lie around New York. Every block there was a dead horse. So our algebra teacher was going to give us a shortcut in how to solve a quadratic equation. He says, that reminds me of Officer O'Reilly. He found a dead horse on Kosciuszko Street, And he couldn't spell it, so he got the horse by the tail and dragged it to Ninth Avenue. You know, I told that story to a fella in New York. He says, well, he says, Ninth Avenue ain't very close to Kosciuszko Street. Now, never, Mr. Rosenzweig, the math teacher, told us that story. Kosciuszko Street.
Well,
Hope I didn't be looks too long. When I get started,
no. I think we have a good interview.
Well. But it just proves that nobody can plan anything. We're just what they call pawns on the chessboard of fate. You can take it with you if you like. If I can find some more of them. Gems. But these are mostly mine.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, Clara took all her writings to San Francisco with her.
Okay, thank you.
And Latin, Finnish Latin, you know, and she was so surprised I was able to speak some Finnish to her.
Huh.
Well, it says, Suomalainen tyttö. This means a Finnish girl.
Yeah.
And my wife was a corn-fed Kansas blonde. We went to visit the Finns, Mrs. Laxona, so right away when I came in, she says, David, I knew someday you would marry a Suomalainen tyttö. She thought Clara was a Finnish girl. Suomalainen tyttö.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and then my Swahili ain't too bad.
Swahili.
Oh yeah, I was speaking Kenny, you know. Jumbo. Habari. Hello, how are you? So you say, Nzuri sana asante sana. Very well, thank you. Which in Chinese you say, very well, nan hao shish ya. So I've got a smattering of about 25 languages.
Yeah.
Even Russian.
Have you ever been in Africa?
I've been there. That's where I spoke my Swahili.
Oh, yes.
That is sort of a language they speak all over Africa.
How did you like China?
China was a very, very wonderful experience.
Mm-hmm.
I did things I've always dreamed about. I always heard, you know, the Yangtze River. I used to read novels how these peasants would be dragging ships up the gorges of the Yangtze. And I went down the gorges of the Yangtze, and you can still see grooves they cut in the rock, so these porters could pull the ships up. They pulled big ships up against the current in the Yangtze. And I went down the Yangtze, and then I saw Taj Mahal.
Oh.
Yes, ma'am, we went right there to Taj Mahal, and I'll tell you that art. Everybody ought to see the Taj Mahal. Yeah. Everybody ought to see. Another thing everybody should do is go into the Blue Grotto off Naples in the Isle of Capri. That's another one. You go, you know, you got to lie down the boat because you go to a little cave. It's full of water under the rocks, and if you don't duck at the right time, you bump the top. So you go and they say, "What's this Blue Grotto business?" You turn around, look for the entrance, and you're floating on top of a 50-foot sapphire. That's the only way I can describe what it looks like in there. The sun coming in turns it blue. Il Grotto Azzurra, the Blue Grotto. That's the thing. And then there's a beautiful valley called the Ticino, the Cassin River. It goes through the St. Gothard Pass from Switzerland to Italy, and it looks like somebody took a 30-mile axe, swung it, and just split just perfectly. And the Valle de Ticino. That's